It took me over 7 years after thousands of hours researching and experimenting with tons of treatment modalities whilst experiencing numerous setbacks to understand what the number one thing was that was holding myself and plenty of other sufferers back from being able to achieve long-term recovery. Before I reveal what this is, one thing that I think is really important to hold on to is the fact that our bodies aren't too far off of what fit and healthy people's bodies are, in the respect that we have the same machinery in place and the same parts that allow that machine to function. Now, how well that machine is able to function, on the other hand, that is really the key variable that determines whether we're somebody who's able to get by each day symptom-free, or we're somebody who deals with daily and debilitating symptoms. Which brings me to the number one rule that we must understand if we are to recover long-term from the likes of POTS, dysautonomia, long COVID, chronic fatigue syndrome, and ME. And I've written it down just so I can share word by word exactly what I mean. Okay, so here it goes. Your brain controls virtually every process that goes on within your body. If your brain is unconsciously unable to detect gravitational changes and where your body is relative to the world around it, then it's highly likely that your brain is receiving less than adequate amounts of stimulation and fuel in the form of blood, glucose, and oxygen on a consistent basis. This is fuel that allows it to run the rest of your body in an efficient manner. Because the fact of the matter is that your brain is an absolute beast in terms of what it's actually able to do for you every second of every day. It regulates autonomic activity, which includes blood pressure, heart rate, respiration, sweating, and GI function. It impacts hormonal release and immune activity. It plays a key role in pain processing, and it also contributes to healthy posture by increasing the tone of certain anti-gravity muscles. And of course, there are certain higher centers that also play a role in regulating emotion and cognition. Now, when it comes to conventional brain training, the issue in my eyes is that there are a number of people out there who are promoting the idea that all it takes is a change of personality, a change in mindset, or a change in thinking patterns is enough in itself to drastically alter the way that the brain controls these variables. And I would argue that yes, it is to a certain extent, because we're trying to teach our brain and our nervous system to respond to various stimuli in different ways by controlling our behavioral patterns. However, where I truly believe this rewiring the brain approach is flawed is that we're trying to use our own conscious attention to attempt to influence things that should be happening automatically and unconsciously throughout our brain and body. And I just totally question the longevity of taking that pathway. And I just personally think it's not sustainable, because I like to think about the fittest and healthiest people out there, and I very much doubt very many of them have to tell themselves to feel good or feel healthy. They just automatically feel that way. So the big question, of course, then, is how can we get ourselves in a position where we're able to feel that exact same way? And that's where the point I mentioned earlier on in the video plays such a key role. Because variables like gravity and how our body unconsciously interprets the world around us are ongoing features present during every second of every day. If our machinery has lost the ability to correctly decode these variables, then we're always going to be fighting a losing battle. You see, the brain is a far more complex thing than many people give it credit for, and if it's being continuously deprived of fuel because certain mechanisms aren't well enough equipped to handle the likes of gravity and interpreting the world around us, then there's every possibility that we'll end up experiencing plenty of downstream effects in the form of chronic symptoms. And the set of symptoms that we do have to deal with will be dependent upon which area of the brain is being impacted, because there'll be a direct neuronal link between that specific area of the brain and the area that's producing symptoms. But if you did want to learn more about this in far more detail, I highly suggest checking out the Unbeatable Blueprint online course. Here I'll take you through over 5 hours worth of content where you'll learn the ins and outs of exactly what you need to do in order to recover long term, and this includes an actionable step-by-step plan for you to follow. Now, in my opinion, the number one goal if we do want to recover is that we want our body to be able to function more seamlessly in its autopilot mode. And what I really mean by this is we want our body to be able to function in a way where the processes that are going on within us are very rarely brought to our own conscious attention. But in order to be able to work towards achieving that goal, it's entirely contingent upon your brain receiving accurate amounts of sensory information and adequate amounts of fuel in the form of oxygenated blood on a continual basis. So what happened in my case was that I went through extensive neurological testing, and during this examination a couple of very key things were uncovered. One of which was that my visual system wasn't taking in accurate information regarding my surrounding environment. And then another thing was that my vestibular system, so certain centers within my inner ear that are responsible for detecting gravitational changes, also weren't working up to scratch. And what was coincidentally discovered alongside these two things was that whenever I was in an upright position, I was only maintaining between 65 and 70% blood flow velocity up to my brain, when ideally this number should have been much closer to 90%. Knock-on effects of this for me were of course lightheadedness, anxiety and panic, especially whenever I stood upright, but also because I wasn't receiving enough blood flow up to my brain, it was impacting all of the functions that my brain was controlling, which meant that I ended up with plenty of widespread symptoms throughout multiple organs in my body. So it was these specific systems that were continuously taking on board sensory information and then relaying that information to my brain that I knew I had to focus all of my attention on when it came to wanting to restore blood flow back up to my head. And I knew that if I was able to achieve this goal, it could potentially have astronomically positive impacts on my all-round quality of life. With all of that taken into account, I then got to work by starting to fine-tune these specific systems with very targeted neurological exercises, kind of like how you would work a specific muscle when going to the gym. And after a few weeks of intensive rehabilitation, I was able to maintain close to 90% of blood flow velocity up to my head whilst I was in a standing position. And because of this, the function of all of my organs gradually improved, and what that meant for me was that I became far less symptomatic and far more energetic. And the best thing about all of this was the fact that the results actually held. When you start to understand the message behind this video, you'll understand that a one-size-fits-all approach, whilst perhaps it might be a useful tool to leverage every now and then, is really no comparison for in-person extensive functional neurological testing with a tailored rehabilitation plan. That is, of course, if you truly want to get to the bottom of what's going on within your body on a clinical level. So yeah, by no means am I trying to knock conventional brain retraining, and if anything, this is technically just another form of that. But if you are somebody who's found you've had very limited success with your recovery journey up to this very moment, this might be something that you just want to consider as a potential pathway and a way forward with your life.